The Persian Gulf War in 1991 was a war fought between Iraq and a coalition of Middle Eastern and Western powers led by the United States. The aim of the Persian Gulf War coalition was to force Iraq out of Kuwait, a country that had been conquered and annexed in 1990 by Saddam Hussein. The coalition consisted of 37 nations, but only the United States, with a force of 540,000, Saudi Arabia with a force of 118,000, and Great Britain with a force of 43,000, Egypt with a force of 40,000, France with a force of 16,000, Syria with 15,000, and Kuwait with 7,000 provided significant numbers of personnel. The war began in January 16, 1991, with the coalition launching an air assault on Iraq and its troops and military installations in Kuwait.
The Persian Gulf, also called the Arab Gulf by the Arab countries, is a kidney-shaped water body in a northwest to southeast direction. The Gulf covers 90,000 square miles, an area equal in size to New York State and Pennsylvania combined, and contains 8,630 kilometers cubed of water. The Gulf is one of the most strategic waterways in the world because of its importance in water-oil transportation. It contains 715 billion barrels of established oil reserves, representing over half, 57% of the world's oil reserves, and 2,462 trillion cubic feet of natural gas reserves, 45% of the water total. Persian Gulf countries contain about one-third of the world's productive oil capacity. July 17, 1990, Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein accused Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates of flooding the world oil market with an imperialistic Zionist plan in keeping oil prices low.
Iraqis do not forget the maxim that cutting necks is better than cutting the means of living. O God Almighty, be witness that we have won them.
Specifically, he accused Kuwait for stealing the oil from a disputed supply, the Rumaila oil field which ran beneath both countries. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi military forces invaded and occupied Kuwait.
We are not intimidated by the size of the armies or the type of hardware the U.S. has brought.
1991, President George Bush sent a message to his main national security advisors, outlining the goals of the coming conflict with Iraq. The president was explicit in focusing U.S. military efforts in four major areas: to effect the immediate, complete, and unconditional withdrawal of all Iraqi forces from Kuwait, to restore Kuwait's legitimate government, to protect the lives of American citizens aboard, and to promote the security and stability of the Persian Gulf War. Though oil is at stake, President George Bush and British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher tried to minimize the situation by saying Saddam Hussein is a dictator whose expansionist ambitions must be checked in the interest of world peace. The Western powers tolerate dictators when it suits their interests. In fact, they tolerated, financed, and armed Saddam Hussein himself when they needed someone to protect Iran under Khomeini coming to dominate the Gulf area and threaten their oil supplies. U.S. involvement in the situation was immediate, as Shah Jaber al-Sabah, the Emir of Kuwait, met the Secretary of Defense Richard Cheney to request U.S. military assistance. President George Washington condemned Iraq's actions while U.S. military commanders and strategics formulated offensive plans. The United Nations passed a resolution calling for military action if Hussein did not withdraw his forces by January 15, 1991. Iraq ignored all demands, and in response, a coalition of UN forces began immediately to build in Saudi Arabia. On January 12, Congress granted President Bush the authority to wage war. At 2 o'clock a.m. Saudi Arabia time, on January 17, 1991, American, British, and Kuwaiti aircraft took off from bases in Saudi Arabia and from aircraft carriers in the Gulf. Their mission was to begin the campaign of airstrikes against targets in Baghdad and military targets in Iraq and occupied Kuwait. This was the beginning of Operation Desert Sun, the long-planned operation to liberate Kuwait. When the Allied armies launched the ground war on February 23rd, the Iraqi occupation forces in Kuwait were already beaten. At first, the Iraqi forces didn't put up much of a fight. As coalition troops advanced, most of the surviving Iraqi soldiers either surrendered or retreated northward. Cut off from their supply bases and headquarters by the intense air campaigns, thousands of Iraqi soldiers simply gave up rather than fight. As the Allies pushed through Iraq's defenses with relative ease, in the few cases where the more elite Iraqi forces, such as the Republican Guard, stood and fought, superior American, British, and French equipment and training proved the undoing of the Soviet-equipped Iraqis. By February 26, U.S. and Allied air forces, along with the underground Kuwaiti resistance, controlled Kuwait City, and Allied air forces pounded the retreating Iraqi occupation army. In southern Iraq, Allied armored forces stood at the Euphrates River near Basra, and internal rebels began to break out against Saddam's regime. On February 27, 1991, President Bush ordered a ceasefire, and the surviving Iraqi troops were allowed to escape back into southern Iraq. On March 3, 1991, Iraq accepted the terms of the ceasefire, and the fighting finally ended. Hostilities ended with a temporary ceasefire on February 27. Iraq agreed to terms of the United Nations permanent ceasefire on April 6, 1991. The Persian Gulf War marks the first time in history that air power played the most important role in deciding the outcome of a war. That is moving.